So now, let's learn a little bit more about what we call Hilchas Chumrah. When to keep Chumras and when not to keep Chumras. This is extremely important that we understand, and let's begin with that there are basically, in my opinion, three types of Chumras, three types of stringencies. There are halachic Chumras, which means that the halacha obligates us to keep certain stringent opinions. That's number one. Number two, semi-halachic chumras, which mean, for me, this is a chumrah or a halacha that I must keep, and not for everyone else necessarily. That's number two. Number three, there are chumras that go beyond the letter of the law, and that's most of our chumras, and that's something that nobody's obligated to keep, and that we have to talk about who should be keeping them and how they should be kept. A lot of times this is what confuses the Baal Tshuva world, the world that in general, and the Baal Tshuva world specifically. Since the Baal Tshuva doesn't have a Masorah from his home, and many homes have certain cases where they're machmer in certain things and not other things, he doesn't exactly, or she doesn't exactly know when to be machmer and when not to be machmer. So since they can't always figure that out, sometimes they'll be machmer thinking that this is a halachic chumrah, and it isn't necessarily so, and therefore it's extremely important that the Baal Tshuva specifically knows what is halacha and what is a chumrah, meaning what is a halacha that I have to keep, and what is a chumrah that I don't necessarily have to keep, or nobody has to keep. And if you want to keep it, then we get into what, the definition of who should be keeping it and when it should be kept. So let's go through these three things. The halachic chumrah means that if you have a situation where it's a suffix doraita, because a lot of times we have cases where we're not exactly sure whether it is a doraita, whether something is really usher doraita, something's prohibited minat Torah, and therefore we have to decide, do we keep it or not? Is it a halacha or not? If it's a suffix doraita, the Gemara says l'chumra. If it's a suffix d'Rabbanan, meaning we're talking about a rabbinic law, then you're allowed to go l'kula. Like for instance, ending Shabbos, right? When we end Shabbos early, so there are some people who feel it's a suffix doraita, and therefore we're machmir like Rabbeinu Tam, right? Because we don't know if we paskin like the Gra or other commentaries, or the poskim like Rabbeinu Tam, and therefore they are strict in keeping Shabbat, and Shabbat is doraita, or they'll at least be strict in keeping the laws that are doraita on Shabbat. That's number one. Number two, and this is a little bit of a tricky one, is I have certain chumras that I have to keep, but other people don't necessarily have to keep those halachot. And that is, I'd like to quote here maybe in Mesilat Yesharim, that says, when he talks about precious, which is already beyond the letter of the law in the Mesilat Yesharim, the concept of precious means to not do certain things that could be permissible for other people. So he talks about the idea of precious with regard to halachot, with regard to dinim. And he says that someone who's keeping precious, who gets to the level in the Mesilat Yesharim of precious, this means that he should really look into different halachot to see if he should keep these halachot or not. And his example is, let's say you have halacha that the halacha is l'kula, that you don't have to keep this halacha. Now the question is, okay, we paskin, we don't have to keep it, right? But if I learn through the sugya, and it comes out that I feel that the opinion that holds l'chumra is what I think is correct, then the Mesilat Yesharim says if you're in precious, you should already keep that halacha, even though we don't paskin that way, since you think it resonates with you and it's something that you feel should be a halacha, so therefore you should keep this. Now the Mesilat Yesharim is making it very clear that you have to be learning through the sugya in order to decide that. You can't just be keeping this chumrah just because other people are keeping it. if you haven't studied the sugya properly, then you should not be keeping this. I'd like to bring this out actually with a story I saw written by somebody who asked Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach whether he should be machmir and not use an Eruv on Shabbos in Yerushalayim. Because there are people who don't use the Eruv. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach asked him, why do you want to be machmir? Are you being machmir just because others are being machmir? If that's the reason, that's not a good reason. But if you learn through the sugyas in Eruvin and you decided that even though we don't paskin like certain opinions of Rishonim, you want to paskin that way because it seems correct to you, then that's a good reason to keep not to carry on Shabbat in Yerushalayim. So the idea here is, if I study the sugya and it comes out that it's usher, right, then one has a right to keep this chumrah, whichever chumrah it may be. But if he hasn't studied the sugya, then he should be keeping the halacha and not being machmer like what we call the dat yachid, the individual opinion. The second thing that the Mesilas Yesharim says over there is that it's only on condition you could be machmer, is that it doesn't work out to be a kula in other areas. Professor Yehuda Levi, in his book Torah Study, actually says something very interesting about this. He has a whole section on chumras, and he says every chumrah requires an expenditure of money, time, or energy, which one can use to devote to mitzvahs themselves, like Torah study, chesed, etc. So almost every chumrah leads to a leniency at the same time. In fact, he quotes Rev Gustman, Zichron Livracha, Rabbi Yisrael Zev Gustman, who said this explicitly, that he knows that keeping most chumras will turn out that you'll be machmer in this case, but you'll be makel in another case. I'd like to just point this out maybe with a story about Rev Elyashiv. I was told by a salesman of Lulavim that he heard this story, or he was there when Rev Elyashiv had happened. I don't remember, but someone came to Rev Elyashiv with a beautiful etrog, which cost a lot of money, a couple of $100. And Rev Elyashiv said it was a very beautiful etrog, perfect condition. And the guy told him that, he asked him how much it cost, said a few $100s. So he said, so what do you do for a living? He says, well, I learn in Kollel. So Rev Elyashiv said to him, for you, this esrog is not muhudar, this esrog is puzzle, because you have to feed your family, and if you're learning in Kollel and your wife is working, so what you should be doing with the money is buying her a dress for Yontif, because that's a daraita. But as far as keeping an etrog, you could be yotzi with any kosher etrog, and therefore here we get into this idea is keeping a chumrah. You want to be machmer and get a hidur or a hudar esrog, but not on anyone else's shoulders, not to anyone else's detriment. And that's what that's the idea of Rav Elyashiv was basically bringing out.